Here we go. Here it is.
Okay. Sunday. So this is what we're gonna do. You're gonna start with the video. What time are you gonna show the video?
1 minute past, right?
1 minute past. So you're not waiting for anything. You start right away.
I'll start. I'll
And
just say
then-
hello to everybody. I'll say thank you for joining. I'll say thank you to you. And then we will start. The kids
Got
are
it.
coming.
And then I'm gonna talk for a few minutes. Now, originally we were gonna do some stuff about Twersky. Are we still doing Twersky, or you don't want to do anything about Twersky?
Oh, we should have. We should have. We never got around to it. But you can bring in Twersky.
I'll bring in Twersky for a few, you know.
The
And,
reason why it's a
and
little
then
bit.
I'm gonna talk for a few minutes, and then how. Well, it says broadcasting.
No, we're not broadcasting it.
It says we're broadcasting.
Oh, somebody started. Did you press it? Okay, for whatever reason. Okay, it's fine.
6:59.
Okay, let everybody in. No, I can't find the screen, my doll. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. We've just started the month of Adar. Adar is Mishnichnas Adar Marbim Besimcha. You increase in happiness. One of the ways of increasing in happiness is renovating your life, getting your life right. To speak to us this evening, we have Rabbi Pinson. He's the Chabad director of downtown Detroit. But he's done amazing work in helping people rehabilitate their lives in all areas. So it's a great honor to have him. What we're going to do, though, he's going to be speaking the Rebbe on. We're first going to start off with showing a short video of the Rebbe speaking on the Rambam's life. You'll see the video, and then Rabbi Pinson will come on and address us. If you have any questions, you can please WhatsApp it or post it, and we will come back to you. So let me begin with the video. Sure.
Bishas me lehnt in Igeres, in der Igris Rambam, is do a Igeres, was beschreibt sein Leben, sein Seder Ayem und sein Seder Achayim. Zet men as bepeilen noch nie gewähne, as ami Mensch abal Yisurim. Wo das ist schon gewähne, Bishas Gadlusse, wenn ist schon gewähne, im Bechatzar von dem Sultan, mit alle Proten, wie beschreibt dort. Die Isurim kipschuton, wie beschreibt, Chulsches Aguf, Reiv hat Tirdeis, Alachas Kama bekama mi betrachtzach. Sendig de Gadlus Rambam ist doch verstandig, in was hat gelebt und in was hat gekocht. Und wie beschreibt dort, wie ist durchgegangen, Reiv, de Bekamu, Shel Yem Shelei, in Injoni, was seine legambrische Lebeerich von den Injoni, mit welcher lebt und hat Teinig von sich. Wo das ist der Linie nach Hochmann. Und wie der Rambam mit der Chmaflik bekam Mekemis, Allachas kam mehr in Nevuchim, was der Schleimus von einem Menschen in der Linie von Seichel Schalei, der Linie nach Hochmann Schalei. Und wie allein beschreibt, der Rev Hayem Tekuli, was geht beim Weg, in Injoni, was in Schreich ist zu Meise, wie Dibur v'chulu, nicht in Injonim Shali und nicht in Injonim Shal Chochma. Afal Pikein, wie kommt zu der Maskone, mehr in der Woche, und sagt, das ist der Schkofe von Aiden, der Schkofe von Tera, als diese Aiden, was mir darf gucken auf der Welt bei Ayin Teva, mit der Tikva Teva, mit der Bitochen, Chosek, v'chuli, wie dort meirig, bekam die Zeus, was kommen Reis von der Hanoche. Was all derech wie das ist bei Chayev ha-Protim shel ha-Pesik, ha-Meir in Nevuchim, all derech sei, das bei Chayev von Kol Am Yisrael.
Let's call somebody up talking, please. Yeah, I want to switch this off. Okay, Rabbi Pinson, over to you.
Hi. Thank you.
Sorry about that. My engineer's not here today. He's overseas. Okay.
Good afternoon and good evening for those who are past half a day, which is where it's here in Detroit. Thank you for your kind words of introduction earlier and for inviting me to talk with the Chabad members of Chabad of Zoom, Johannesburg. I will speak today a little bit about the Rebbe on mental health. We just watched a short video where the Rebbe discusses a person, Maimonides, who his day job required him to do a lot of things that were not necessary.
Rabbi Pinson, I think you're frozen there.
And we'll circle back to that in a minute. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you clearly. Yeah.
Okay. I got some text messages that I was frozen. Okay. When we talk about the Rebbe on mental health, it's important to make a little distinction between mental health that requires medical attention and mental health that requires spiritual attention. So we are obviously here discussing only mental health that is either already addressed by medical attention or that does not necessitate medical attention. And if we're not sure, then we must consult with professionals, both on the side of mental health and regular medicine, to make sure that the condition that we're experiencing is one that does not require medical treatment. And if it does, we must first get the medical treatment, and only then could we figure out what is the spiritual treatment. That's the first disclaimer. The second disclaimer is that in general, when it comes to medicine and when it comes to Jewish law, there is no rules in a vacuum. There's a context. The context is the specific situation that is presented to us. And the Torah does not deal in hypotheticals. Halacha does not deal in hypotheticals. A Rav, a rabbi that is asked to rule, can only rule on an actual situation, and the siyata d'shmaya, the help from above that a doctor and a rabbi have when answering questions to make sure that they don't, God forbid, make a mistake, is applicable only when it's an actual real life situation. In hypotheticals, there is no such siyata d'shmaya. There's many stories that reflect this point. So even though we're going today to talk about general ideas, when it comes to applying these principles in one's life, we must speak to an individual mashpia, an individual mentor that has knowledge of the exact details of the situation before saying that this and this technique should be applied in this and this case. So these are two obvious disclaimers that I want to put up here. The Rebbe tells us that a human being is created different, was created different than all of other creatures in the world. Whereas even the mammals that were created in the 6 days, that are physically and biologically very similar to the human body and to the human physical existence. However, they differ in a way that is incomparable, completely different, which is that the animals were created alive, that their body and their soul, quote unquote, were created in one step, whereas the human being is created in 2 steps. One step is the physical body, and only later, vayipach be'apav nishmas chayim, that God blew in his nostrils, in the human's nostrils, a spirit of life. And therefore, human beings have 2 separate entities that exist parallel to each other. One is the physical entity, and the other one is the spiritual entity. And when there is synchronicity between one's physical body and one's spirit, then a person is in a good mental health state. They're satisfied with their lives. However, when a person there's a disconnect between how they treat their body existence versus how they treat their soul existence, then this disconnect creates unhappiness and what we call a mental health condition. That's the general idea of positive mental health and positive spirit in the human being, is the recognition that we have a spirit and the nutrition, the same nurturing and nutrition that we provide for our body, on the same level we provide for the soul, in a way that the body and the soul are in harmony with each other, which is what the video of what the Rebbe was telling us about Maimonides, about the Rambam, that because he had the right attitude, in other words, because the Rambam was a highly spiritual individual, and he nurtured his soul, he was able to get satisfaction from what his body did, even though from an objective perspective, it could have been beneath his greatness to deal with such lowly things. Now, when we talk about what is the body and what is the spirit, there's many, many interpretations. We have what it says in Chassidus, Nefesh HaElokis and Nefesh HaBamis, the animal soul versus the godly soul. But these terms are very esoteric for regular human beings, the way we conduct ourselves in our daily lives. To summarize a little bit what the Tanya says about Nefesh HaElokis and Nefesh HaBamis in a very, very simplistic way. Nefesh HaBamis is about the ego, self-serving, and Nefesh HaElokis, the godly soul, is about serving something greater than ourselves, whether it is God, whether it is Torah mitzvahs, whether it is society and community. So in plain English terms, we can say that when I am active, when I am behaving in a way that feeds myself and feeds my ego, then I'm feeding my body. And I want to behave in ways that is selfless, that is for something greater than myself, then I'm feeding my soul. That's the basic way of understanding what Chassidus says, the difference between nurturing my soul and nurturing my body. Last week, we lost a giant in the world of mental health and Judaism, a pioneer and a personal mentor and friend, Rabbi Dr. Abram J. Twersky. And in my early years when I was here in metropolitan Detroit, building a community of recovering addicts and alcoholics, we brought down Rabbi Twersky for a couple of days for a series of lectures to doctors, rabbis, community leaders, the community at large, and also specifically for recovering alcoholics. One of the sponsors was there with me at all of those lectures. And he told me he was very, very disappointed. Rabbi Twersky basically repeated himself 4 times in all these lectures, and he said exactly the same thing. And on my way back to the airport, Dr. Twersky was sitting in my car, and he says, "So, Yisrael, how did we do?" I said, "It was great. You had a great impact on all the different demographics that we hoped you would have an impact on. It was a great turnout. Your name is a great attraction. However, one of my sponsors is very, very disappointed. He followed you around like a groupie, and he was disappointed that you repeated the same thing in every one of the lectures." So Rabbi Twersky said to me, he said, "Yisrael, if I have something that I genuinely believe is the most important thing and the most important message that I need to speak about right now, why would I switch to my second most important message when I speak to another group? Everyone needs to hear the most important thing. And the most important thing is what I ended up saying to every one of the groups." So I thought that was a very good explanation. And I'll tell you what, that this is more than 15 years ago for sure. It was probably 17, 18 years ago. And I still remember what it is that he said. that he repeated at every meeting. And he was talking about the difference between the spirit of a person and the body of a person. He did not give the interpretation that we just brought earlier from Hasidus. He had his own interpretation, which is very valid. This is what Tversky says. He says, what is the difference between an animal and a human being? We're not just a chimpanzee with a brain. We're more than that. What are the differences between animals and humans? And he starts enumerating them. An animal does not have the capacity to share with someone outside of their species. We do. An animal does not have the capacity to contemplate past actions for them to adjust their future behavior. An animal doesn't have the capacity to delay gratification, etc., etc. He had a bunch of examples, but I'm just giving you the top three, and each one of you can come up with different ideas. Well, every single characteristic that differentiates animals from humans constitute the human spirit. And when we take advantage of those characteristics, we're being spiritual. And when we're not taking advantage of these things, in other words, we behave exactly in the same way the animals do, in the ways that we're similar to them, which is eating and sleeping and copulating and other things, then we're not being spiritual. So his definition of spirituality versus non-spirituality is the difference between doing things that are specifically human, that's to put together are the human spirit. But at the end of the day, it's very similar to what we discussed. All of us know how to nurture our body. The top three categories are food, shelter, and clothing. So it says in Chassidus, so that must be the truth. And from a youngest age, we know that we need to be protected from the elements properly through shelter and clothing. We need to sleep, have a good night's sleep, and we need to eat proper diet. That comes to us naturally. We never forget to sleep or forget to eat or forget to get dressed. However, we absolutely and definitely miss a lot of information of how it is to nurture our soul. And because we're not naturally trained, and I'm not talking about people who grow up in families that are not necessarily observant of the Torah and knowledgeable in the mitzvot. I'm saying even a person that is very, very observant, quote unquote, in all of the 613 commandments and studies Torah, we are also not knowledgeable of how to nurture our soul. We do all the behaviors, we follow all the laws, we study all the right things. But are we giving food, shelter, and clothing to our spirit? And when we don't, when there is this imbalance between how much we nurture our body and how much we nurture our spirit and our soul, this is when we are dealing with a disconnect that can create a mental health imbalance. Again, not a chemical, not a mental health issue that needs medical treatment, but a spiritual mental health issue. I'm going to touch on one more point, and then I'm going to open it up to questions and answers. And I'm not really sure where those questions are going to come in. My Rabbi Twersky's entry to mental health was in the field of addiction, and so was mine. And at the time that Rabbi Twersky started, he was trying to bring out the fact that there is such a thing as addiction and alcoholism in the Jewish community. By the time I came around in the beginning of the 2000s, it was already a lot of work in this field has been done, and the new task that we put forth to do is to show that there is recovery in the Jewish community. Addiction and alcoholism we knew already, but that there are Jewish people who were deeply involved in the solution to the problem. And this is what we did at Friendship House, which is locally here in West Bloomfield, Michigan. It's still a running organization, even though I'm not involved anymore. This is what we did with the website jewishrecovery.org, which is part of Chabad.org, which has a huge library of articles and recordings on Judaism and recovery. And one of the things that I got involved was studying the early literature of recovery and how it fits with Judaism. You know, are the 12 steps acceptable in Judaism? Is going to meetings acceptable to Judaism, et cetera, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I came across a very interesting letter that Carl Jung wrote to Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm not going to get into all of the details of it, but the way Alcoholics Anonymous was started in the 1930s was through an idea that came from one of Carl Jung's patients at the time. And it's not until 1960 that the dots were connected and that Carl Jung was asked for his opinion on Alcoholics Anonymous in general. The premise of Alcoholics Anonymous is that the solution to alcoholism is a spiritual one because the problem of alcoholism is a spiritual one. And in this letter, which you can Google it and look, letter from Carl Jung to Bill Wilson, Carl Jung says that the reason that he told his patient back in the 30s that the solution to his alcoholism is having a spiritual awakening is because the problem of alcoholism is a yearning for God that is unsatisfied. He quotes from Psalm 42, Ke'ayel tarog alafike moim, ke nafshi tarog elecha lekim. It's a famous Hasidic nigun, just like a deer that yearns for the brook of water, so too my soul yearns for you. And David HaMelech, King David, says that he yearns for Hashem just the way that a deer is looking for a source of water. And this thirst for Hashem is what is driving the alcoholic to drink alcohol. Obviously, it does not fulfill the thirst because it's the wrong substance. And the only way to take away the thirst for alcohol is to replace it with drinking spiritual waters, which is being connected to Hashem, because that's the reason for the disease in the first place, which is one of the basic teachings that Twersky kept on saying to us all the time about why we need spirituality as a solution to alcoholism, is because alcoholism is like taking the wrong medication. If you have a deficiency in vitamin B, and you keep on putting a lot of vitamin C in your body, it's just not going to help. You need the vitamin B. To conclude Carl Jung's letter, he says, that's why the correct formula, the scientific formula for recovery from drugs and alcohol is spiritus contra spiritum. The word in Latin and in English for alcohol is spirits. It's rooted in the same thing. And the way to counterbalance the addiction to spiritus, to spirits, to drinking alcohol is by having a spiritual life. And even though this was spoken specifically about alcohol, but it's self-understood that all these problems that we have, and we all have our own little problems here and there, but especially now during this difficult times, for a year now, everything has been upended. The solution is to look into how we are nurturing our soul, how we are possibly neglecting to feed it in the right places in the right time. And that creates an imbalance in power between our body and our soul, which God created separately as two separate entities that need to balance each other and that need to be fed equally in order for a person to be completely healthy. We can imagine, what would the opposite do? If a person would neglect their body by not feeding it, by not sheltering it, by not clothing it, by not sleeping properly, then obviously it's self-understood, everyone understand that their body would wither slowly. There would be different illnesses that would come. At the end of the day, before we can address the illnesses, we have to address the basics of feeding the body. The Rebbe tells us again and again, there's many books that have been published. There's a 3-book series on the Rebbe on mental health that I encourage everyone to read by Rabbi Weinberg. There's many Hasidic teachers that have spoken at length about all these things, and I encourage you to visit jewishrecovery.org also. It all boils down to how much are we paying attention to our soul. If we have 2 children in our home, and one of them is fed, clothed, and sheltered, and educated, and given all the tools for good life, and the other one, God forbid, we neglect, then what a pity and what a shame, and actually it's criminal. It's criminal. The same goes for our spirit, for our soul, however you want to define it. It's not enough to do Torah, to do mitzvahs, to check off the list of all the good things that we are doing in terms of behavior, in terms of following the rules, but we have to see how are we nurturing our soul. Activities that nurture our soul are activities that the person who is behaving is not the primary beneficiary of that activity. That's a good way to measure it. We talked about selfless. That's not about my ego. Am I the primary beneficiary of this activity? If I am the primary beneficiary of this activity, it's probably not nurturing my soul, it's nurturing my body. If something else and somebody else is the primary beneficiary of it, it's probably nurturing my soul. So I would like to take some comments and specific questions.
So one or two, Rabbi Pinson is really unbelievable. One or two comments have come in questions. Firstly, just before we go further, did you say that alcoholism or addiction is a yearning for spirituality that is unsatisfied?
Correct. And I quoted,
Is that from Carl Jung?
That's from Carl Jung, but I heard it from Twersky in a little different way prior to someone sharing that letter from Carl Jung with me. The way Twersky said it to me was someone who has a deficiency in vitamin B and basically is taking vitamin C, which is never going to work because he's taking the wrong medicine, And Carl Jung put it very succinctly in that letter. I encourage you to look it up. And yes,
Please repeat
so
the letter.
alcoholism is a
Carl
spiritual.
letter to who?
I'm
Who was
sorry.
it? It was Carl Jung's letter to who?
To Bill Wilson. He's the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. The whole premise of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which the 12 steps are, the word alcohol figures in there only once, is not about alcohol. It's about the person becoming a better person. It's a spiritual solution. So if you're going to say that the solution to alcoholism is a spiritual solution, obviously it means that the problem of alcoholism has to be a spiritual problem. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So, yes, every scholar that is knowledgeable about the program of 12 steps and supports it as a way of treatment for alcoholism believes that alcoholism has, besides its medical condition, which it does, it has a physical addiction, but in addition to that, it also has, and it started from, a spiritual disease. Because how else could you treat, if it was only a physiological disease, how would it have helped? And if you want to know more about this, I strongly encourage you to read a book called God of Our Understanding by Rabbi Shea Staub. He wrote the book on understanding addiction and alcoholism from a point of view of Torah, and it's blessed by Rabbi Twersky, and it's everything that I said today probably is in that book.
Just, I don't mean to catch you off guard, but it says that according to Kabbalah, according to mysticism, the fruit that Adam and Eve ate in the Garden of Eden was an intoxicating fruit. They got drunk. Noah tried to fix it up, and that's why he planted a vineyard and got drunk.
Yeah.
And Seraph corrected the sin. Would you elaborate on that? I didn't mean to catch you off guard.
If you go on jewsrecovery.org, we have a couple articles. We have a guy that wrote articles on all the Parsha. So we have 52 articles. It's called Ben A on the Parsha and recovery. And I believe that either in the Parsha, I believe in Parshas Noach, it talks about it. But basically, is alcohol used to boost the ego, or is alcohol there to remove our ego? And when alcohol is used properly, it will diminish our ego. And when it's used improperly, it boosts our ego. And then you can interpret all the stories around that. Adam had an opportunity to make Kiddush on the wine after 6 hours, and that would be an activity that would be diminishing his ego. And unfortunately, the way it was used prior to that was in a way that was boosting his ego, and everything that came from there. So the wine on its own, there's nothing wrong with alcohol. That's another very important thing. There's nothing wrong with alcohol in the Torah. Alcohol is considered the opposite. It's all the big mitzvahs we use alcohol for. We use wine for all the mitzvahs, alcoholic wine. The Torah has nothing. And AA also, by the way, Alcoholics Anonymous is not against alcohol. It's against alcohol for alcoholics. But it's not against alcohol. There's nothing wrong with alcohol. It is how we use the alcohol. Are we using it as a way to self-medicate, which is an ego-boosting activity, or are we using it as part of a ritual and a spiritual activity, which is positive?
If one has fallen and one has become an addict, has one lost free choice and can never go back to it? Is that the only solution, that you have to bend yourself all the way to the other side? Or can one ever go back to being a normal person?
You're asking two questions. You're asking in general, or you're asking specifically about alcohol?
Both.
When it comes to alcohol, a person develops a physical dependency on alcohol that according to medicine is not curable, it's only treatable. And the treatment of it is abstinence. Excuse my English, it's my fourth language. Abstinence is the only way to treat a physical addiction to alcohol, and therefore there's no going back on that. So once you're diagnosed as an alcoholic, you should not drink alcohol even for the Seder and Pesach. That's a psak halacha that I got from Rabbi Twersky, that is accepted by all rabbanim, rabbis that deal with mental health and addiction. No going back. When it comes to freedom of choice, then you're asking a question that's generally addressed when it comes to addiction. That when it comes to the 12 steps, the step number one is admitted that we're powerless over alcohol, that our life has become unmanageable. So people say, one second, you're saying that we lose our freedom of choice. How is that compatible with what we know in Hasidus and Jewish philosophy, that the human always has a freedom of choice? So I'm not going to go into the in-depth explanation why it's not a contradiction. I'm first going to say it's not a contradiction. And the 12 steps there's 0 things in the 12 steps that contradict Judaism. And the vast majority of people who refuse to do the 12 steps because, in their opinion, it's not Jewish enough or it goes against Judaism, it's unfortunate, but I would call it a good excuse. But if you want to follow the opinion of rabbis, there is absolutely zero problems with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. To give you the gist of why it's not a contradiction, when a person, it says in Tanya that a person, which means that we have always the capacity to overcome any of our instincts that come from our animal soul by introducing a godly soul. However, the Tanya says that if a person has done so many averos, then it becomes dysfunctional, and there is this masach hamavdil, there's this gate, an iron curtain that falls, and that makes the system not work anymore. And then, yes, a person loses some of their freedom of choice when it comes to follow their animal soul versus the godly soul. That's what it says in Tanya.
So that means you can become
what the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous says like this: your freedom of choice does not come from yourself. It comes from your relationship with God. That's what it says in Tanya also. It doesn't come because I'm a strong guy, I have freedom of choice. Where does freedom of choice come? It says, I have a nefesh shalakis. And that really the balance of forces between the animal soul and the godly soul is not fair. And by nature, the animal soul will win every time. However, because God is on the side of the godly soul, therefore, it is possible to win over the animal soul. What if I disconnect it from God? What if I think that I'm God, I'm in charge, I got power, I got everything? Then I don't have this help from God, and therefore, yes, my animal soul wins every time. The first step of Alcoholics Anonymous is not to say that I give up my freedom of choice and I don't have a choice, and therefore I need to give up alcohol because I don't have a freedom of choice. It's quite the opposite. It's saying that my ego has gotten the best of me, and as a result of that, I don't have real freedom of choice. And I am powerless. I'm powerless because I don't have freedom of choice. However, in step 2, when I accept God as my higher power, that's when the freedom of choice is restored to me. It's restored to me because I now have moved away from ego-based behavior to God-based behavior. And that's when that's why Alcoholics Anonymous says that there is no need to hide alcohol away from an alcoholic. An alcoholic is allowed to go in a bar. If they're doing their program, if they're in a spiritual state where God is in their lives, they have full freedom of choice of taking the first drink. Now, after they took the first drink, this is a whole different thing. There's a chemical reaction in their body, and then they lose the capacity to stop. But they always have the capacity for the first drink. And like we say in Tanya, that the Beinani always has the capacity to push away the first thought. The first thought comes in, and he has the capacity to push it away. And an alcoholic, when they think about wanting to drink, they have full freedom of choice to push away the first thought. If they follow a spiritual program where their whole life is based on a relationship with God, not on their own ego. So, in short, I hope I answered your question.
Good. So we're running out of time. I want to ask you one last question. That is as follows. You said that a person has to have an alternative. There's a strong spiritual thirst which is not being satisfied, so he's got to have a spiritual satisfaction. Give us some practical, down-to-earth, not rote things that will intoxicate us spiritually, because that's what you're saying. A person has to become intoxicated spiritually, that you're so fulfilled spiritually that you don't need that void to be filled. Give us some practical. It's Mishnichnas Oder. Help us become intoxicated with spirituality.
Right, and we know the famous talk of the Rebbe about the Reb Zera and Rabba and Reb Zera. They got intoxicated on Purim until they literally, one of them passed out and his soul left the body. And the Rebbe explains about spiritual intoxication. To me, the guiding principle is to do something for something else without any benefit to me. We know that the Rebbe put Ahavas Yisrael as the basis of all of his leadership from day one. No other Rebbe spoke about stories of Ahavat Yisrael in the Maimer, let alone the first Maimer of their leadership. And as we know, it's also the last talk that we had from the Rebbe in 1992, Parshas Vayakhel, the Rebbe talked about Ahavas Yisrael. So, the foundation of a spiritual personality is one that is willing to do something for another person, even at the cost to oneself. And in a very simple way, volunteering, to me, is the key to begin a spiritual life. Service to other. There's many, many ways why it works, but one of the simple reasons is that a lot of our mental health issues have to do with us living in our own head alone for a little too long. And being obsessed with self. Being preoccupied with self. And when I go out of my way and I do something for another person, I exist on a different plane. I get out of my own head and I'm elevated to a whole different perspective in life. And I think this is exactly what the Rebbe was saying in the video that you showed in the beginning, that would be great if you show it one more time at the end. And it's something that I personally do all the time. When I am overwhelmed with all the big projects, the big, visionary things that we're going to change the whole world, and the weight of it all sometimes take a toll, I look at my Rolodex, I look at my emails. What can I do? Something simple, something quiet, something that is completely out of the realm of the big and the huge, but is going to make a person feel great. Go visit someone in the hospital, go call somebody today. It's very different visiting, but it works every single time. When I have zero benefit, it's not someone I'm fundraising from, it's not someone I'm trying to convince to do something, it's not someone I'm trying to bring to the Chabad, it's nothing. It's literally lishma of all lishmas, to go and do a yid another yid a favor, like with no recognition and nothing, just in the most simplistic way. When I do that, then things open up for me, because I got out of my own head and I went and I acted on behalf of another Yid for no other reason than because of what is expected of me of Rabbi Yisrael. And the Rambam, Maimonides, even though he was doing all these things that were beneath him, but because of his perspective that he was doing something for a greater good, then he lived happily doing all these things. That's a little bit what it says in that Sikha.
And if you look at the Rebbe, was absolutely selfless.
Right? There's a fascinating story that Moshe Groner says, or what did the Rebbe do the night before Yud Shvat, when he was formally accepting the leadership of the Chabad movement. It's published, you can look it up. But basically, the Rebbe wanted Moshe Groner to go to a hospital and find out the doctor for a patient. The Rebbe left and went to visit this patient in the hospital because the doctor said he wouldn't go unless the Rebbe went. He wasn't the Rebbe at the time, formally. And literally, as the Rebbe was sitting in his house with Sfarim piled everywhere, preparing for the Maimer, the Rebbe was busy visiting someone in the hospital. Look up the story. It's an amazing story.
We're running out of time. We are going to show that video again. But please, God, let's all resolve to do, first of all, Rabbi Pinson, thank you. It was exceptional. It was invigorating and insightful. Let's all undertake to do something selfless. Most important of all, to do something to bring about Mashiach, where there be no more sickness and no more war and no more suffering that the world needs now. And all families will be reunited. And let's all do it in a selfless manner, the way Rabbi Pinson did it. And please, God, we shall only have bracha. I'm now going to share the screen. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. Where's the video? Oh, yeah, I've got to find it. Ask someone to help me find the video, please. Rabbi Pinson, I don't know how to share a video, so we're going to have just hold on 1 second, guys. If anybody's still on, just hold on. There's a video of the Rebbe.
Is it on the computer?
Yeah, it's on the computer. Somehow it disappeared. There's a YouTube video. Better? There it is. No.
See, where was it?
Better? I can leave it at that.
If you can't show it, you can't show it. It's not the end. If you have it, let's show it one more time.
Don't have it? We'll have to do it another time. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining.